Shalom from Israel, and welcome to the Temple Institute. I actually have to tell you that the last time I broadcast, my wife watched the video, and she actually felt I wasn't smiling enough. So I'm going to make every attempt now to smile. My wife always smiles, and especially during this time, I think we all need to smile, and I'm going to make an extra effort to smile throughout. And if you feel I'm not smiling enough, then in the comments below, you can actually tell me, hey, Rabbi Abba, you weren't smiling enough. Actually, one of the things in Chazal, which is our rabbis, Chachamim Zichronam Livracha, have actually said that Jews actually have to smile. Actually, really anybody has to smile. And if we look in the ethics of our fathers, which is Pirkei Avot, the first parak, and the Mishnah is Mishnah Tet, the 9th Mishnah there, it actually says, our rabbis tell us, V'have mikabel et kol ha'adam b'sever panim yafot. And on those words, Rabbeinu Yonah, who was from the 1200s, a super commentator from the 1200s actually says, Sheyira lahem panim shel simcha. Everybody has to show each other a face of happiness. We have to smile. So I'm going to smile. I'm going to try more to smile. And I think especially during this time, we all should smile. And in fact, as we know, it says in Psalms, chapter 100, verse 3, Ivdu et HaShem b'simcha. Serve God, worship God with happiness. Let's all try to be happy. Last week, we spoke about the power of speech. And I could go on and on and on about that for probably 10 more videos. But we're not going to do that today. Today, we're going to speak more about the Mikdash, the temple. However, we did leave off last week about speech. So I want to actually sort of segue into the temple with the idea of speech. And in fact, there is a Gemara, there's a Talmud in Tractate Megillah, which is on page 18, and it says that instead of speech, Sama dekula mishtuka, which means the greatest medicine for a person is being quiet. And sometimes you have to think about that maybe it's important to just not talk. And that's the way to save yourself from bad speech. And unfortunately, the Meraglim, the Meraglim in English, sorry. We'll have to edit this. Sorry? The spies, thank you. The Meraglim, the spies in the desert, they could have used this advice to be quiet. And in fact, as we'll see, they were the source of all our problems with the destruction of the temple on Tisha B'Av, on the 9th day of the Jewish month of Av. The Meraglim, what they did was they spoke Lashon Hara. They spoke evil talk, bad talk, negative talk. And they spoke it about, actually, Eretz Yisrael, about the land of Israel. And the Meraglim, what they did was they said, we can't live there. It doesn't matter what God promised us. We just can't live there. Okay, let me quote you from the Talmud in Erchin, which is Tractate Erchin and page 15. And it actually says something very interesting about the spies and what they did. And here it says, let's go see how great is the power of bad speech. Where do we know that from? From the Meraglim, from the spies. And what did they do? They only said bad things about rocks and wood, meaning they spoke about the land of Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, badly. And look what happened to them. They all died in the desert. In fact, they had to stay in the desert for 40 years. Not too good. And so, of course, someone who speaks bad about his friend, how much more so is that bad? And in fact, because of this bad speech, that same area in the Gemara, a different Talmud, it actually states that that night that they spoke bad about Eretz Yisrael was the night of Tisha B'Av, the night where the 2 temples were destroyed. And in fact, it says there in the Talmud, in Ta'anit, Tractate Ta'anit, a different tractate, on page 29. Feel free to open these Gemaras up, these Talmud up. And in fact, you can find great translations in, there's Art Scroll, which is called the Schottenstein Gemaras, the Schottenstein Talmud. There's also Adin Steinsaltz, who also translates it into English. I would strongly suggest that you find the sources and look them up. Important. And it says there in the Talmud there, in Ta'anit, that night was Tisha B'Av. And HaShem said, HaShem said to the Jewish people, you cried for nothing, because I promised you that the land of Israel was going to be good. I told you Israel would be good. Why don't you believe me? And because you cried for nothing, I'm going to set this day up of Tisha B'Av. The night of Tisha B'Av will be for you a time to cry for generations onward. Pretty frightening. And unfortunately, it came true. So let's move on to actually the temple. The 9 days, we are starting the 9 days come Wednesday. That means tomorrow is the first day of the month of Av. We actually call it in Hebrew, we refer to it as Menachem Av, because we want God to give us comfort in this month of tragedy. Tragedies that happened throughout the centuries for the Jewish people while they were in exile. In fact, the Gemara states in Ta'anit, once again, the same Talmud in Ta'anit, Tractate Ta'anit, it actually says 5 bad things happened on that day. 3 of them we've already quoted. 1 of them is the Meraglim, and 2 are temples being destroyed. But you know, throughout Jewish history, many bad things have happened, and we're going to get to them in a second. Now, the 9 days are such a dark period for the Jewish people that the rabbis decided that during this period of time, we don't eat meat. Why don't we eat meat? It's to remind us that we no longer can bring sacrifices into the temple. We don't drink wine. Why don't we drink wine? Once again, to remind us that we can no longer bring the wine libation, the yain hanesech, that was brought every day in the temple. We don't get haircuts during this period of time to be like those who are in avelut. When people are sitting shiva, just like people sit shiva, they don't get a haircut. So too during these 9 days, we don't get haircuts. In my case, it won't be a problem. We also don't listen to music during the 9 days. And interesting enough, the reason for that is because the Levites used to play the instruments and music in the temple, and we no longer have that. And one of the ideas behind the Levites actually playing music in the temple was to bring an element of happiness for that in the temple service. The idea is when you're happy, Ein Shechinah shari ela mitoch simcha. The only time the Shechinah can come upon you is when you're happy. When you're sad, the Shechinah is not going to be there. So the idea is that we also don't play music reminiscent of the Leviim, who unfortunately no longer are playing music. As we'll get to, hopefully one day that will change. There were other bad periods, and I'd like to mention 2 of them, actually, and you'll understand why. In 1492, the Jews were expelled from Spain on Tisha B'Av. At the time, the great leader of the Jews was Don Yitzchak Abarbanel. Abarbanel was also a great financier who actually ran the treasury of Spain. And yet he was a great rabbi at the same time, and we have many of his books on the Bible, actually, that he wrote that are fascinating. The Abarbanel at the time saw how distraught the Jewish people were on Tisha B'Av. And what he did was, they were all leaving Spain. They were wealthy people, Jews, going to nowhere. Imagine in those days, they had just, 1492 is when Columbus discovered America. So we understand is how raw the whole world was and how scary it was to go on boats to go to who knows where are they going to find refuge, the Jews. So Don Yitzchak Abarbanel, despite how sad a time it was, Tisha B'Av, the destruction of our temples, he actually rendered a halachic position, and which is a halachic law. He decided then that they would have music as the Jews went on the boats on Tisha B'Av itself, because they were so down, so depressed. And he felt we had to lift their spirits up. And in fact, what's so interesting about that particular halachic rendering is that today in our time, with so many Jews going through rough times in this period of, I will say the word, but only once, period of Corona. So there are many rabbis today, great rabbis, who have also said that we're allowed to have music during the 9 days. Not on Tisha B'Av, but at least during this period of time to listen to music, even though generally we don't. There's another period that was also very bad for the Jewish people, and unfortunately, it really affected me in a big way too. The Gemara actually says in Tanit that the time of Av, Ra'a Mazle, your mazel's not good. The mazel is your luck. Bad things happen during this period of time. Certainly we want to change that, and we'll talk about that in a second. However, what happened was, about 15 years ago, was the expulsion of Jews from Gush Katif, a part of Eretz Yisrael, a part of Israel. And I fought very hard to stop that expulsion. Unfortunately, those that tried were unsuccessful. Rabbi Ariel, actually, Rabbi Yisrael Ariel, the head of the Temple Institute, was actually at the head of the forefront, I would say, of those trying to stop the expulsion of the Jews. And here's the interesting thing is, initially when the government of Israel decided to expel the Jews from Gush Katif, the expulsion date fell out on Tisha B'Av. And that, I think, says it all. And they realized how terrible an idea that was, and so they pushed it off by one day. It certainly didn't help, but it gives you an idea how bad things can happen during this period of time. And in my mind, these kind of things, we need to change. And we have actually the ability to change these things. But changing it has to come from a place of positivity. And the positivity, that place of positivity can come from the temple. And I believe that by us studying about the temple during this period of time, because the source of all pain of this time is really coming from the destruction of the temple. We don't have the Shechinah being shoreh. We don't have the Shechinah with us. And we need to do and fix that. And the way to fix that is based on a pasuk. The Shichno tidrushu uvata shama. You must be doresh. You must seek out the Shechinah. You must seek it out. You must want to build the temple. You must learn about the temple. Uvata shama, and come there. HaShem will do it for you, but you have to show him that you want to do something. As we say in Hebrew, there's a word called hishtadlut. You got to do your hishtadlut, which means you got to do your thing. You got to show that you're making an effort. And so during this time, I think it's important for us to all come to the conclusion we're going to make an effort to learn about the temple, to go to Har HaBayit, and show we're going to defend the honor of God on Har HaBayit by showing our presence there. We're going to show them we want it. And I think when we show them we want it, we'll be able to get rid of this black pall, this black period of time in the Jewish people's gullus existence, and change it for the better. And in fact, let's put an end to any more Tisha B'Avs. Let's hope that next year we don't have to celebrate Tisha B'Av ever again. Thank you very much for listening.